Hey everybody, we are the Cultures Compass 2024 team. My name is Jessie.
I'm Brooklyn.
I'm Maria.
I'm Wei.
I'm Kareem.
This is Hani.
And I'm Tudor.
To tell you a little bit about us, Cultures Compass is a project led by Humber CCBI and Humber Galleries. It takes different shapes every year, and for a second year in a row, we've partnered with Small World Music in support of their Global Toronto Music Festival, also known as GTMF. This year, we're excited to share a new interview series called Compass Chronicles, where we'll be highlighting 4 Toronto-based musicians who are showcasing at GTMF this fall. In the process, we aim to explore the impact and influence of Toronto's rich cultural fabric on musicians in the city. In this episode, we wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are and where we're coming from as well, so you get to know us and the reason we're working on this project. This whole team of us at Cultures Compass sort of comes from a variety of different experiences. For starters, we're going to talk to Tudor, who's been living here his whole life. And Tudor, I'm wondering if you can speak to your experience living and working in Toronto as a musician and also with a company like Small World Music.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to, Jessie. I moved here when I was about a year and a half from Romania. Growing up, my experience was a lot of food and music in the area and being exposed to all sorts of different spices and tastes and sounds and smells. So that's really led into my musical taste too, being really into Brazilian music, jazz, hip hop, obviously. So these are all influences that I was coming into contact with early on and have now, I guess, materialized in the music I'm making and the values I have, and how that plays into Small World. So they're trying to create a more honest picture of the Toronto music scene. They're also trying to showcase a wide variety of artists coming from different places culturally and stylistically. And there's some challenges for sure, but there's also a lot of successes and a lot of impact.
Thanks, Tudor. So in contrast, we have Wei, who's actually really new to Toronto. Wei, I'm wondering how you're finding living and working in Toronto as a newcomer and how it feels to interact with the art and culture scene here.
So I have only been here for less than a year, and from my perspective, Toronto is a multicultural city. It's my finding so far. So you can easily enjoy the different cultures here, especially the food, the music. But last month, there was a Taiwanese music festival in North York. So many Taiwanese musicians and singers coming to here to perform and to promote the Taiwanese culture. And I believe next month, there's a Korean music festival coming in the North York Center as well. So Toronto absolutely is a diverse city around the world.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Wei. This reminds me of Maria, too, who is also a newcomer here. And I'm wondering, Maria, if you could touch on your experience working in Toronto compared to Colombia, where you were working most recently.
Yeah, so same as Wei, I'm new here. I've been here 6 months, and actually this is my first job. There was a cultural shock when I realized that here you just work 8 hours, because I used to work 11 hours. Sometimes you can feel the imposter syndrome, and it's not easy to deal with that. An advantage that I see is that I'm building my new identity, and the best part is that I'm working in the art industry, and I know art gives you another perspective, and more if you are with different kind of cultures, like here in Canada. So yeah, this is my feeling now.
Yeah. And I think that's cool, too, about what you said about sort of building a new identity. I remember talking to you a while ago and you were saying you're like a different person here and you have a chance to like rebuild who you are. And I think that's very exciting as well. You know, and on that topic about how it can feel so different to live in Toronto and diversity in this city, I'm wondering if we could talk to you, Hani. I know you've been living here for about 9 years now, about your perspective on diversity here and how we understand it in Toronto and sometimes use it as a tool maybe without understanding it first.
That's definitely a good point about using diversity as a tool without truly understanding or appreciating it. My background is Syrian, and I was born and raised in the Emirates for 16 years before I moved here 9 years ago. And I've definitely gotten accustomed, and Toronto's pretty much home at the moment. But I have noticed over the years how all over the media, the word diversity is almost used as a marketing strategy. Like, we are the multicultural center in Canada. We are a diverse center in Canada. And that's all beautiful. But I also do feel, from my perspective, that at times diversity is just being used as another thing on a checklist that you need to tick off, rather than it being something that truly enriches the many communities here. There isn't something shared amongst all of them. And I think that Toronto still needs to do more work around how to bridge those gaps between all these communities. On the other hand, of course, diversity is, as I said, a very beautiful thing. And the advantage that Toronto gives is that it puts newcomers and those who are from Toronto in circumstances that forces you to interact with people that you may have not before. You're having to navigate new modes of communication. You may be becoming more culturally competent over time, and you'll grow from these experiences, and your identity in turn changes because then you learn more about yourself when you learn from others as well. It's relational. I feel like through all these different communities, your experience in Toronto is enhanced because you don't get that much range anywhere else, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing your thoughts on that too, because I like how you can be really real, but you're still pretty optimistic about the state that we're in right now, and I appreciate that. And on the topic of understanding diversity, I think it's honestly such a great opportunity that we have to be working with a company like Small World Music, who makes it their goal to understand the different cultural communities in Toronto and to uplift them and to uphold their pillars of equity, sustainability, and accessibility. But as we are coming to know, there are some challenges in maintaining those, and I'm wondering if we could also maybe touch on that together.
Small World Music, as you said, does a fantastic job on shedding light and uplifting the very different communities and artists of many different cultural backgrounds. It's one of the most diverse sort of initiatives that I've seen. One of the challenges businesses, initiatives, nonprofits within the arts and cultural sector face is to make sure that these themes are actually maintained on a universal level. At the end of the day, this is something that's quite new in the sector, the focus on these themes, and we're bound to make mistakes and we're bound to learn from them as well. I think Small World Music is bound to be a trailblazer in that regard. I think that another challenge to be faced, while we're putting in that effort to be equitable and accessible and sustainable and representing all these communities, supporting them, uplifting them, we may be doing the right job, but then how does the audience become engaged and attracted and want to attend things that they're not necessarily used to, something that's different to them? The idea is that how much this audience engages with and is present in these sort of situations and events mirrors and reflects the cultural change we want to see in our cities, where people are actually understanding diversity rather than it just being a one-sided effort and it's just not resonating with people.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Sometimes I feel like it's really easy to steer away from thinking about it negatively in any way because that just seems like not the goal. But I feel like you have to be really critical sometimes about these things just to realize where you might be falling short.
To that point, I would say it's not that they necessarily try to focus only on the positive, but it's more about celebrating the little wins. They're taking it in time because, yes, it's about hitting certain numbers. We need for this kind of program, but that's not how they're operating internally. They're saying, okay, we're doing this thing, we're celebrating that it went well, but it's this isn't the peak. We're still going from here.
I think ultimately, when we're trying to make an impact, we're acknowledging how big the challenge is, right? So I think the importance of celebrating those small wins. I mean, it's rare that we have a huge breakthrough moment. It's always the little wins that accumulate. So it's realizing that to make a lasting impact, it's a marathon, it's not a race, right?
Yeah. As somebody who's an overthinker myself, it's I always want to make sure people are on that same page. It's I want to make sure we're not leaving anybody behind, right? Have we considered everybody? And I don't want it to be too overwhelming, but it's easy to forget about certain groups of people. And especially when we say accessibility, it's in what way are we working with accessibility right now? Because it'd be really, really hard for an artist who is neurodivergent or an artist who has any sort of communication issues. It's so important as an artist to be able to communicate and do that with your work. And I think people just think you need to have that in you as a musician. You need to be able to put yourself forward and be in the spotlight. But as I was saying earlier to some of you, it's really hard when you spend all your time trying to be a good musician and you think that's enough, and then you realize that there's so many other things you have to do. And sometimes you can't look at someone and say, well, that's just the reality of the situation, because maybe they actually have barriers that make it really hard for that to be their reality or that to be something they can address and do.
I also feel like another aspect of making the workplace and the arts and cultural sector more accessible is being more culturally competent. Because at times we say it's sufficient that we see that representation of diversity, but that visual aspect is not enough because many times those involved and that make up that diversity don't actually feel like they're part of a whole. They still feel quite excluded. And I feel that it's very important that on the topic of equity, accessibility, that we as arts and cultural workers, as creatives, put in the effort on a personal level as well to learn how to be culturally competent, to make sure that we are creating spaces, events, initiatives, and workplaces that are truly inclusive and that are accessible and that are equitable.
I think from a musician standpoint, the arts community is so far ahead of other kinds of workplaces. I mean, we see so much now how people get put in that group in order to meet the quota, but when we look at who is making that quota that has to be met, it's still somebody.
That's where the red flag is.
Yes, exactly. But in the arts sector, because everybody is coming from such different places and everybody is starting on that same ground level, like it's the same venues, everyone is developing their careers, and everybody also has different goals, I think. There's financial success versus like success in just doing what you set out to do in the first place. And I think that a lot of artists understand that really well. And so between the artists and organizations like Small World Music, there is a lot of hope.
I think that's been a great discussion. I really appreciate how open and honest we've been, especially because we hope to touch on these topics some more directly from the source, from the artists that we're going to be interviewing for Compass Chronicles. All of these artists are going to be showcasing at Global Toronto Music Festival, so please stay tuned to hear their thoughts on being a musician in Toronto. They're all Toronto-based, and to learn more about what their performance might be like for the fall.